What is up, everybody? Thought I'd hop on here tonight to talk a little bit about Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another. Obviously, this movie has a lot of commentary on the political atmosphere that we find ourselves in right now as a country. And specifically, it has a lot to say about the left and, the concept of being a revolutionary leftist in the United States of America. Because of that, obviously, the film has created quite a discourse online. I think the discourse really started to pop off, though, the other night when the film took home a handful of Golden Globes and really solidified its status as the Oscar frontrunner. At this point, I think it's pretty fair to say that One Battle After Another will most likely win Best Picture. But either way, this discourse that's popped off online, and again, understandably, because of the fact that this movie touches on so many relevant and controversial themes, it has started a little bit of a discourse. And I wanted to take a look at some of these takes and kind of analyze each of them. So here's this take that says, basically, One Battle is about the revolution and immigration, and yet none of the winners from the film mentioned ICE or what's happening in the country right now at the Golden Globes. I have mixed feelings about this, but ultimately I think the reason why many of the celebrities didn't go into politics at the Golden Globes has more to do with the fact that they've realized it's completely useless to do that. I mean, think about it, guys. Back in like 2015, 2016, every freaking celebrity at the Golden Globes and the Oscars had to say something about Donald Trump, and it kind of only made Trump stronger. Because the Republicans got to turn around and say, oh, look, see, all the opposition is just a bunch of Hollywood elitists. It's just a bunch of coastal elitists that don't understand the actual issues that we're championing on behalf of the working man and all this kind of crap. So, while I understand the point being made here, I actually think it would be counterproductive, even for the team behind One Battle, to go deeply into politics and sit there and condemn Trump and condemn ICE and all. Again, I think it honestly only makes the Republican Party stronger at this point. Although I understand the sentiment of the tweet, and it's always better to have more people speaking out against fascism. Obviously, that goes without saying, but I do understand why people kept their mouths shut at the Golden Globes, given what a failure it's been in the past to use that venue as a form of protest against the current administration. Again, it's already been tried. It's already failed. But Briahna Joy Gray, she responded to this. And Briahna Joy Gray, obviously, she was the press secretary for Bernie Sanders, and she hosts the Bad Faith podcast. She chimed in with this. And I thought this was a pretty crazy take, to be completely honest. I've agreed with Briahna in the past occasionally, but I thought this tweet was pretty insane. She responds and says, because it's a movie mocking revolutionaries, which it's not. I don't think One Battle After Another is a movie that mocks revolutionaries. But even if it was like a movie that was mocking revolutionaries, are you really implying that Paul Thomas Anderson and Tiana Taylor are somehow pro-ICE? That the reason why they made this movie and why they didn't call out Trump at the Golden Globes is because secretly they're supporting the regime of Donald Trump, and they actually support the immigration crackdown, the mass deportations, the killing of American citizens. Like, you could call it cowardly for them to not bring it up, but to say that, oh, they actually intentionally made this movie to mock the left, and the reason why they didn't bring it up is because they actually somehow maybe agree with those things, that's completely crazy. Obviously, that's not true. I think that's absolutely wild, and I see no evidence to back that up. Absolutely no evidence to back that up. So pretty insane. I also want to zero in on this notion of mocking revolutionaries. I think this is a very specific word choice on the part of Briahna Joy Gray, because I think it's a bit of a straw man here, and I don't think that, and I think she's intentionally misrepresenting what this film does. And the reason I say that is because I genuinely believe that Briahna Joy Gray understands the concept of satire. Yeah, satire. I think there's a difference between cruelly mocking someone or something or a movement as a whole and satirizing it, right? I think that's beyond obvious, right? Lots of movies satirize movements which the artist supports, right? The filmmaker supports. Lots of art that comes from the left is critical of the left because the people that made the art understand, and they're making a movie which reflects the inner dynamics in that group as a whole. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is on the left. I think most of the people involved in the making of this movie were on the left. They might not be as radically left as me or as Briahna Joy Gray, but I think that's kind of besides the point. I think it's weird to assume that this movie in any way is mocking revolutionaries instead of satirizing them. And I think there's a very important distinction there. And I think that line is intentionally being blurred by Briahna, right? I think that it's clear that, yes, this movie does poke fun at the left at some points. The Leonardo DiCaprio character clearly has some elements of satire as it pertains to the way a revolutionary or a hippie is depicted. But is that not allowed? Are we not allowed to poke fun at ourselves? Are people on the left not allowed to make art which reflects some of their satirical opinions about the left as a whole movement? It happens all the time. And people on the left are constantly critical of other leftists, including Briahna Joy Gray. If you guys are at all familiar with Briahna's content, she's constantly criticizing other people on the left, other progressives, people that are elected to office that identify as left-wing. She's very critical of them. So I don't understand this notion that you're not allowed to criticize the movement that you're a part of. Obviously, Leo's character, despite being a little bit of a bumbling pothead, is still depicted as a good person, a good man who has good values. Same with his daughter, played by Chase Infinity. And just because Leo's character is portrayed as someone who did too many drugs back in his heyday and drank too much alcohol back in his heyday, are we really going to act like that's not accurate? Some revolutionary lefties are potheads. I'm a freaking pothead. A lot of revolutionaries in the 60s and the 70s and the time period that Leo's character was active, yeah, they were doing a lot of drugs. They were doing acid. They were doing psychedelics of all different varieties. And I think it's a pretty accurate depiction of the way some people of that generation who were hippies act now that they're a little bit older and have to take on these, more mature roles like parenthood and stuff like that. Again, it's funny. It's poking fun, but I don't think it's critical. I don't think the point of that character and the way he's portrayed is to mock the left. And let's say, even if you think it is, even if you look at Leo's character in the film and think, oh, this is a depiction of a useless, bumbling idiot. This is Paul Thomas Anderson saying that the left is just a bunch of idiot stoners who think they're doing important things when really they're just bumbling around. Just say that's your reading of the film. Fair enough. I think that's pretty insane. But even if you want to go with that, you definitely can't say that about Benicio del Toro's character. 100%. You definitely cannot say that about Benicio del Toro's character. He's leading a very effective resistance against the immigration police, ICE, essentially in this film, and successfully gets a bunch of kids out of harm's way. Very effectively orchestrated. Nothing cartoonish about it. I mean, obviously he has his funny moment with the, a few small beers thing, but he's not depicted as some idiot. The film is clearly not critical of his character, even if you want to make the far-fetched case that it's critical of Leo's character. Again, I just don't think you could say that about Benicio del Toro, who's just as much of a anti-authoritarian revolutionary in this movie as Leo. I just don't understand. I just don't understand omitting that to only focus on the Leo character at the expense of Benicio, who's very important, in some ways carries the whole second act of the film, to totally ignore the depiction of his character, to again focus on the way the film mocks Leo. That's just inaccurate in my opinion. And I think that Leo is clearly channeling Jeff Bridges from The Big Lebowski in his performance. I wouldn't say that in The Big Lebowski the Coen brothers or Jeff Bridges were mocking slackers or mocking stoners, both of which the dude obviously is. He's obviously an icon of the stoner culture and of the slacker culture. No one in that culture looks at the dude as someone who they're embarrassed by. No, we put up posters of the dude. In the same way, I think a lot of ex-revolutionaries or people who used to engage in revolutionary activism back in the 70s, I think they would look at Leo's character in One Battle and say, hell yeah, dude, that's a very accurate depiction of the kind of people I was, or the kind of people I used to hang around. Again, an affectionate portrait, but still poking fun. There's nothing wrong with that. It really blows my mind. So again, I think the whole line between mocking and satirizing is intentionally being blurred here. And while no one would deny that there's a little bit of satire of the revolutionaries depicted in the film, that's just different than mocking them. It's not cruel. It's not negative. It's barely even really critical. If anything, it's just for comedic effect. Again, channeling the dude, some of that stoner humor of I can't remember the password. What's the password, bro? And the guy on the other end, that's just That's just simple satire. It's affectionate poking fun. So that's my response to this line, which is really the common criticism I see from a lot of hardcore lefties when it relates to One Battle. And again, as someone who's a hardcore lefty myself, absolutely a hardcore left-wing socialist, I think it is a little bit bizarre to assume that a piece of art needs to be a political manifesto and not something that just reflects the zeitgeist from which it's created and which it's intended to be about. And that's what One Battle is. It's not a political manifesto. It's not Paul Thomas Anderson sitting down and saying, this is what I think about politics and this is where I stand and yada, yada, yada. I mean, you certainly get shades of that, but it's not a political manifesto. It's supposed to be a story that takes place in a climate that reflects ours, that says something, that says multiple things, including sometimes contradictory things about the world we live in, the society we live in, and the political climate that we find ourselves in. Why does it sometimes seem contradictory, or why can great art oftentimes seem contradictory when it's trying to reflect these very complex facets of life? Well, because life is sometimes contradictory. People are very complex, much like the Tiana Taylor character in One Battle After Another, who initially I did have some issues with the depiction of, but the more I think about that nuance and the more I think about the contradictions that PTA was kind of trying to nail down with that character, I think it was quite successful. So, let's take a look at another one of Briahna's tweets here about Tiana Taylor. And before I do throw this up, I also wanted to say that I'm glad Briahna is engaging with the film, even though I disagree with her. I think it's proof that One Battle is a successful piece of art. So I just wanted to say that none of this is me hating. It's just me adding my own opinion as someone who's also a big fan of film as an art form. But Briahna says, this isn't Tiana Taylor's fault. This is a criticism of Paul Thomas Anderson, not her, but her character wasn't complex. It was confused. Paul Thomas Anderson all but admitted in several interviews that he didn't really write Taylor's role. He just turned her loose on set. It shows real disrespect for the actress and reflects a tendency of some white folks in film to cast blacks for their authenticity, as though every black actor is a thug or hip hopper or whatever stereotype is being depicted. I also read that he drafted the beginning of the film later in the process due to feedback from producers. I'm not even really sure what that means. So, there's a number of issues with this statement, in my opinion, that I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So where do I even start with this? For one, I mean, directors oftentimes let actors improvise on set. That's not something that like PTA came up with. It's not the first time a director has worked with an actor and had an understanding that I'm going to let you kind of read into this character what you want to. I'm going to let you create assets or facets of this character's backstory. I'm going to let you go wild. Lots of directors do that. It's actually quite common. I mean, some directors have a very ironclad approach to screenwriting, and they're like, you have to follow every word on the page religiously, and your character is my creation. A lot of directors don't take that approach. A lot of directors will give the script to the actor and say, hey, you make of this what you will. I was actually just watching a behind the scenes documentary on David Cronenberg's Cosmopolis, and some of the actors and actresses in that movie were talking about how David Cronenberg didn't tell them anything about their characters, that he gave them the script, which had these bare bones lines of dialogue, and said, you come up with everything, come up with it all, create it all, do whatever you want with it. Here's the text. It's up to you. So this is actually not a novel or unique approach that hasn't been taken by a lot of directors before when they're working with actors who they trust. And I'm not really sure if Briahna is implying here that Tiana Taylor's character in the film comes off like a thug or a hip hopper, but that's definitely not how I read the movie. That's definitely not how I read the movie at all. Yeah, I definitely didn't read her character as being like some sort of thug or like, stereotype of a black person. To me, she just seemed like a totally badass revolutionary who had a lot more of a complex character than Leo's character clearly wanted to believe, and as many people in the audience wanted to believe. She's presented as this total badass revolutionary left-wing force, but then we quickly realize that her morals are a little bit more in a gray area than we thought, and she might be a little bit more in it for herself than we thought, and her moral compass might teeter a little bit more than you would expect given her introduction and presentation in the opening act of the film, which I actually think is really interesting. And it's a daring and bold decision for PTA to make in collaboration with the artistry of Tiana Taylor, and the fact that as Briahna said, he just turned her loose on set. I think that was a brilliant decision on his part. I think her performance is among the most powerful performances in the whole movie, if not the most powerful. And I think that the moral ambiguity of that character, while it may be initially confusing and frustrating, I actually think it's some of the most accurate commentary in the film because, again, contradictions are inherent in humanity. Contradictions are inherent in political activism oftentimes. I mean, we see it over and over again, specifically on the left. I've studied the left for my entire adult life. I do a whole show where I talk about and dissect the left. We see this over and over again. We see activists turn to the dark side. We see people like Kristen Sinema come up with the Green Party and then sell out immediately as soon as they get a fucking ounce of power. And again, I think that the contradictions and the moral ambiguity inherent in that character are what makes that character interesting. And it's one of the things that's actually stayed with me most with One Battle. You know, I have issues with the film in some regards. I do have some criticisms of the movie, but ultimately I think that the ambiguity and the moral gray area that Teyana Taylor's character lies in is one of the most interesting parts of the film and one of the most successful elements of the whole movie. But either way, you know, I'm glad that Briahna spoke her mind as far as her criticisms of this movie goes. They're definitely interesting. They gave me something to think about, although I disagree with most of them. And again, I think that's a testament to this film's power as a piece of art. You know, it is something that will get people talking. It'll start a conversation. It'll trigger passionate reactions on both sides, love it or hate it, right? So I think, again, that's a testament to the film's power. And I think that in a similar way to Eddington, you know, this movie can't just be boiled down to a mere political manifesto or a moral statement. And I think that's an issue with the way a lot of people want to read movies these days, specifically people that come from the world of politics, that talk about politics professionally, or again, are from that world. They want to look at movies as a little bit more of a black and white, like moral statement. Like, is this director pro this or anti this? Like, where does he stand? Do they agree with me? When in reality, I think oftentimes the pursuit of an artist, the pursuit of a filmmaker like Paul Thomas Anderson or Ari Aster with Eddington, you know, the point is not necessarily to make this super flamboyant ideological statement or a real moral screed necessarily. It's really about creating a piece of artwork which reflects the climate and reflects the world that we live in, and something that you can look at almost like a tableau or a tapestry and see different shades of different ideologies and oftentimes contradictory nuance, right, thrown in there to kind of set you off or to get a reaction from this kind of person versus that kind of person. I think that these movies intentionally try to provoke you a little bit, right? Both One Battle and Eddington. They both understand that sort of provocative nature of political discourse. And I think they both kind of play into that in witty ways, but in ways that don't dilute the sophisticated subtext, which is happening here. Because again, they might not have clear-cut moral messages, but I think you can read a lot into the subtext of both One Battle and Eddington and find that they both are made by people that are on the left pretty indisputably. Yes, there are moments where it satirizes the left, but I think ultimately, obviously, if you watch the movie, the clear takeaway is that these people are on the right side of history. All the revolutionaries in the film, all of them are on the right side of history. And the fascists are on the wrong side of history. Like, that's beyond obvious. And I think it's pretty clear watching it where the sympathies of the filmmakers lie. But that's my opinion. I would really love your guys' opinion on some of this discourse. I know I didn't get a chance to cover every single bit of it, but, you know, I figured I'd chime in with my 2 cents. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.